You might already have a list of these big tion words. There's a few things that I've added to this list, so take a moment to add those to yours as well. The order does not really matter. I spent a lot of time in class talking about the incarnation as a pillar of our faith. It is attested to in the Gospels and the epistles. John's Gospel especially, the Word was made flesh and made his dwelling among us, is a key passage for that. The resurrection, again, the other pillar of our faith as Christians, the idea that Jesus rose from the dead, attested in all four Gospels, discussed at length by St. Paul in several epistles. Reanimation is the idea that somebody dies and is brought back. And there are actually several gospel stories and even some Old Testament stories where people die and are brought back to life. The most famous is Lazarus, but there's also a little girl that Jesus raises and a widow's son. And the prophet Elijah and Elisha both raise people from the dead. The virgin birth is the idea that Mary was a virgin when she gave birth to Jesus, that Jesus was not conceived biologically. And the perpetual virginity of Mary is the idea that Mary remained a virgin her entire life, not just before the birth of Jesus, but on until the end of her life. Interesting, the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, verse 1, has a passage that refers to the brothers and sisters of Jesus, which might actually contradict that. We'll have a little bit of a class discussion on that later. The Immaculate Conception is not in the Bible. The Assumption is not in the Bible. The Ascension, however, is in the Bible, that Jesus, after he rose from the dead, appeared to his followers for a period of time, and then departed from this earth and returned to the dimension of God, if you will, and is with us until the end of time. And the Annunciation comes from the story of in Luke's Gospel, where the angel comes to Mary and announces, if that helps you, that she is going to have a baby. Again, there's two infancy narratives, Matthew and Luke. They are very, very different. Matthew has an angel appearing to Joseph to convince him not to divorce Mary. In the Gospel of Luke, an angel appears to Mary and tells her that she's going to have a child. And so it is found in one Gospel. There are several doctrines up here which are not actually in the Bible. They are statements by the Pope or by the Church that these are articles of faith. Often these are done by ex cathedra statements. Those are not attestable terms. That's not a testable term. But the idea that Mary was a virgin her entire life is not something that's attested in the Bible. The Immaculate Conception, and lots of Catholics mix this up with the virgin birth. The Immaculate Conception is the idea that Mary, as the vessel through whom God came into the world, was herself free from the effects of original sin, that Mary herself did not sin. And again, that's not in the Bible. It's a development in church tradition later. It was formally defined as a teaching of the church only about 150 years ago. The doctrine of the Assumption is the idea that Mary, since she was free from sin, did not have to suffer the consequences of sin, death, that we all suffer, but instead was assumed into heaven, that she did not die, but went directly to be with God at the end of her life. And that doctrine was defined a little over 50 years ago. So those are more recent pronouncements by the Church, although they were believed by people long before the Church formally defined them. Interestingly, when I went to Israel, there is a Church of the Dormition, an Eastern Orthodox church in Jerusalem that is supposed to be the grave site of Mary, that in the Orthodox tradition she died or fell asleep before she was assumed into heaven, which seems to be a slightly different doctrine. Again, those are church teachings. Reincarnation, a little pop-up there, is a Hindu belief or a Buddhist belief or a Sikh belief that we die and come back into a new body. That is not a Christian belief. So Hopefully you have definitions for all of those. Pause and go back if you need to. I want to go a little bit further and note that several of these doctrines are focused more on Mary than on Jesus. That God coming into the world could happen biologically. There's nothing that makes Jesus less if he is conceived biologically. But some of these doctrines seem to be focused more on Mary, emphasizing her unique role in salvation history, that she was a virgin when she gave birth to Jesus, that she was a virgin her entire life, even though she's married, and being married involves sexual intercourse, and that's good and positive and healthy. But the tradition is that Mary and Joseph never had intercourse. The doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, again, is focused more on Mary as the vessel through whom God comes into the world. The Assumption is about Mary's going to heaven, not ascension, which is Jesus departing after the resurrection, and the Annunciation as well. Interestingly, and this will bring us to our next slide, the dating of the Annunciation is March 25th, and that date might not mean much to you, but in the early Christian church, it was sometimes associated with the day that Jesus died, that the day that Jesus rose and died and rose is the same date that Jesus came into the world, that God came into the world, became incarnate. So an early tradition has Jesus being conceived on the same date he was killed, and one early tradition has that as March 25th. So if you take March 25th and add 9 months to it, then you come up with Christmas. And so I'm going to go to the next slide now. We've talked about the seasons and dates, and I'm going to give you a little more detail to them. We talked about ordinary time. During ordinary time, which is mostly during the summer each year, we listen to the stories of what Jesus did and what he said, the miracle stories, the parable stories, the teachings of Jesus. And Christmas and Easter then are, to use my phrase, extraordinary time. We are celebrating the two pillars of our faith, the idea that God became flesh and the idea that Jesus rose from the dead, and that we too, if we follow the example of Jesus, will rise from the dead as well. Christmas is celebrated on December 25th, as I noted before, and this extraordinary season of Christmas is preceded by a period of preparation. 4 Sundays before Christmas constitute what is called the season of Advent, where we get ready to celebrate the Incarnation. And liturgically, Christmas as an extraordinary season is gold or white, and Advent as a season of preparation and repentance is purple. Easter is the other, and if you look at the calendars on the wall, the bigger celebration season, the bigger extraordinary season, and it too is preceded by a period of preparation and repentance, a season that we call Lent, and that is 40 days long. So here's where I need to get a little bit complicated with you. Christmas happens on December 25th. Easter is a movable holiday, and the other feast days that are connected to Easter are called the movable feasts because they shift according to when Easter is. We know from the scriptural accounts that the death of Jesus happened close to the Jewish feast of Passover. The Jewish feast of Passover happens in the spring, and it's calculated according to a lunar calendar, not a solar calendar like we use in the Western world today. And the dating of Easter each year in the Christian tradition follows that same lunar principle because we want to celebrate Easter on Sunday, the first day of the week every year, because the first day of the week, Sunday, is when they found the empty tomb. So Easter is calculated, and write this down carefully, as the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox, or the vernal equinox. So the spring equinox is March 20, 21st, 22nd, and we wait for that date, and then we go to the first full moon, and then we wait for the first Sunday. And this can be calculated rather easy. Lent, then, is the 40 days that precede Easter. And technically, it's not exactly 40 days because the Sundays of Lent aren't counted as part of Lent. They're not supposed to be days of preparation and repentance because they're Sundays, and we're celebrating the resurrection every Sunday, kind of like a little Easter. So Lent actually ends up being about 46 days if you get up and count squares on one of the calendars. And the beginning of Lent is Ash Wednesday. And Ash Wednesday is a day in which we put ashes on our forehead. We get ready to celebrate Easter by fasting, giving alms, and praying. And Ash Wednesday is the day that begins that. And again, it's approximately 46 days before Easter. It is more than 6 weeks before Easter. So again, it's a movable feast. The Triduum are the 3 days, Triduum, that are holiest in the Christian calendar. They are Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Easter Sunday. And on Holy Thursday, we recall Jesus' last meal with his followers, the last meal he celebrated before he died, the Last Supper. And we follow the chronology of John's Gospel in this case, that Jesus would have celebrated this on a Thursday evening, and in John's Gospel, this would have been the night before Passover. In the Synoptic tradition, the Last Supper is an actual Passover meal. Again, following John's chronology, Good Friday, if this doesn't seem too ironic, is the day that we celebrate the death of Jesus because he rose. So John's Gospel has Jesus being executed at the same time that Passover lambs are being slaughtered in the temple for the Passover meal. John's Gospel is the one that says that the Sabbath is beginning, so the Romans ask that the legs of the victims be broken so that there aren't crucifixion victims screaming during the Passover meal. And so we follow John's Gospel, and Good Friday remembers the trials, the crucifixion, and the torture and death of Jesus. And then Easter Sunday, the holiest day of the year, begins with the Saturday evening vigil. And the season of Easter we actually celebrate for 50 days. If you look on a calendar, depending on the timing of it, Christmas season might be about 2 weeks long. Easter season is 50 days long. And we recall the resurrection of Jesus and celebrate that. Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Easter Sunday are all part of Holy Week, the holiest week in the tradition, in the Christian calendar. Holy Week begins with Palm Sunday. Palm Sunday is the week or the Sunday before Easter. So again, these are movable feasts. The date for Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Ash Wednesday changes. And Palm Sunday recalls Jesus entering Jerusalem about a week before he was killed. He goes to the temple, cleanses the temple, and is arrested and executed within a few days. Ascension Thursday is celebrated 40 days after Easter, and it recalls Jesus departing from his followers after he rose, that he rose from the dead, he appeared to his followers a certain number of times over a certain period of time, and then he departed. And the tradition is that he stayed on earth for 40 days, appearing occasionally to people, and then departed. And so Ascension Thursday falls 40 days after Easter. Pentecost Sunday closes the Easter season. It comes from the Greek word penta, 50. It is 7 weeks after Easter. 7 times 7 is 49. And in the Jewish tradition, Pentecost was 50 days after Passover. And Pentecost celebrated the giving of the law on Mount Sinai. And for Christians, it celebrates Jesus returning in spirit to his followers after he departed on Ascension Thursday. And he returned to them to stay with them in spirit and us forever.